All right. So, hey, everybody. Today is a special two-part episode because many of you know that I love tennis, but you probably don't know exactly how much. And today you're about to find out. So, I'm here with three really awesome tennis experts. They have their own podcast. So, you need to look it up. It's called No Man's Land Tennis. And I am friends locally with one of these three guys. Maybe as they're introducing themselves, you can kind of guess who. And then we're going to just get into all things tennis and mindset. Now, listen, if you're listening and you don't like tennis, you don't know anything about it, you don't play it, don't leave. This is going to be a really incredible episode that no matter what type of business you have or what type of entrepreneur you have, there will be incredible parallels that's going to make you fall in love with tennis. So we're going to get right into it in a minute. So why don't we start, Keith, why don't you start introducing yourself and then you can share a little bit about how we know each other.
Thanks, Laura. So I am Laura's friend. I've had the pleasure of maybe beating up on Laura a little bit at the
A little
club
bit.
we both belong on. Her and her lovely husband played with my fiance and I. I'm a former USPTA professional, PTR professional as well, and racket technician. I currently work for Amerisourcebergen and joined luckily by some of the better tennis minds and we do a lot of banter and a lot of fun when it comes to the world of tennis now.
Awesome. Cole, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Cole. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I recently just moved to Arizona. I am in the hospitality industry. I've worked in, as a banquet manager, and now I'm out here in a food and beverage role at a private club where there's tennis around. I sort of I got my start in this industry through tennis, sort of teaching kids, the basics. And then I played in high school. And then even when I went to Virginia Tech, I met these two lovely gentlemen here. And Freddie was on the team there, and he'll tell you all about that. But I sort of got to be close with those guys on the team. And now we have a good friend who's on tour, and I sort of I'm listed as his coach, even though I'm not necessarily, teaching him forehands and backhands, but more so from like a mindset and like sort of being there and consulting, getting through the hard times and, staying positive. That's sort of that's my involvement right now. And I'm also still involved in a Monday night men's leagues.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about mindset today because it's so similar to what you need to be thinking about as an entrepreneur. So really good. Yeah, Freddie.
Yeah, like Cole said, the three of us met down in Hokie Land at Virginia Tech. Played 4 years of college tennis down there. And then now I'm the head men's and women's tennis coach at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And yeah, we kind of started up this podcast just as a way for kind of three tennis lovers to kind of banter and catch up and kind of keep in touch over, like Cole said, he moved from DC and Keith's up in the Philadelphia area. So it's kind of a way that weekly we can all stay in touch and talk about the sport that we know and love.
So cool. All right. I'm going to get started by even just getting into mindset, like thinking about tennis mindset. I know for me, that has been huge, is getting back on the tennis court. So for those of you who maybe don't know, maybe they haven't heard me talk about it, I don't even know how much I've spoken about it. I was first singles in high school and then played 1 year of college and got kind of burnt out. And honestly, a lot of probably why I backed out of tennis was I didn't know it at the time, because back then mindset wasn't really being discussed amongst athletes. But I really think that was a big reason why I left tennis for the period of time that I did. And then about spring of last year and a half ago, after having my third child during COVID, I was like, if I'm going to keep my sanity, I think I need to leave the house. Oh, I used to be good at tennis. I'll play tennis again. And so I started playing, and then I was like, oh, I actually used to be really good. Game on. And that's when but I will tell you, it was so hard to get back into it, having been really good, knowing in my mind what I was capable of, having had 3 babies, built businesses. That was really hard coming back. And there were some pretty embarrassing moments where I was, I'd get the email the next day after playing with a group and say, maybe you should practice a little more before coming back and playing with us and things like that. It was really hard. And I'll tell you, getting back into tennis and playing, I'm now probably like 70% back to where I was after a year and a half. It is one of the toughest mindset challenges that I've ever had. It's been fascinating to see it. So let's talk about this idea of failing when you're playing tennis. And I would imagine especially because Cole and Freddie, you're doing some coaching and mentoring, like how can we not make failing mean that we should stop? Or how do we not make it mean that we're not good enough? Like let's talk a little bit about how that relates to being at the top of our game. Like, how do you explain that to people that you're working with?
I can jump on this a little bit here. I think failure is I think it's talked about a lot of times in baseball and that kind of stuff. You hear like, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you go to the Hall of Fame. Not much really changes for tennis. There's a great stat out there that shows Roger Federer's most dominant year, and Cole probably has the stat right off the top of his head. I think it was in 05. He went like 95-4. And that year he only won 54 to 55% of the points he played. Yeah. So that's a guy that lost 4 times and only won on a given point. He only won 55% of the points he played. And coming from a coaching standpoint is something I used to talk about all the time with my students. When I got a new student, or when I had one that was maybe with me for a while, the first question I would always ask them is what are you looking for out of this? And if they said, I want to be X, Y, and Z and had goals and want to do it, I said, well, you better be prepared to fail for a while. It's going to maybe sometimes get worse before it gets better. You're going to have to get rid of old habits and try it. And it's just being comfortable and failing when it comes to tennis, because you do it all the time. It happens nonstop. And it's a confidence thing. It's an energy thing. What I mean by that, it's a mental energy thing of where you're directing your mental energy, how you're directing it, if you're committed to a process, and if you're going to stick with it. Mm-hmm. And the best students and the best players stick to that mentality and fail with, I like to call it grace. They fail with grace and then move on to the next step. And that's, I think, the biggest mindset you can have when it comes to failing in tennis.
Okay, cool. I want to hear what the rest of you have to say about this too. And there's a lot of gold in there.
Yeah, I think, like you said, talking a lot about mindset here, and Keith just touched on it. It's about kind of how you fail and how you learn to fail. I think in a sport like tennis, a lot of it can be very result oriented, mm-hmm. and a lot of people don't look at the process of it. And especially for me, just being a college coach and going through recruiting and all of that stuff, you're just finding so many people really just focus on the result, and then it leads to pulling your mental state down instead of trying to find a way to look at the process and how can you build yourself up even with the failures. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, like just kind of like what Keith said. It's like, how can you use that process to move forward even when it feels like you're taking 2 steps back? Because eventually those 2 steps back are going to lead to some greater leaps ahead.
Yeah. For me, really, Keith, just to sort of piggyback on what you were saying with the goals, I think it's really important for, I don't know, in what I'm dealing with is that professional player, really trying to identify what you want to achieve in your career. So what's your goal? Are you going to be top 200? Are you going to be 100? Are you trying to make that Australian Open because he's Australian? What is the end goal for you? And then always keeping that light at the end of the tunnel and pushing, and even on those down weeks, that's where you need to go. That's where you're going to where you want to end up. And the second side of that is, how can you surround yourself with good people that are going to get you there? It's hard because tennis is an individual sport. You're out there battling and grinding, and you don't you're traveling with countrymen, men and women, but you got to beat these people. So you can't be super close with them. Yeah. But yeah, really, it's just, surround yourself with people that care about you. Identify the goal, and just, it's going to be a grind. You got to wrap your head around that and find ways to enjoy it.
So good. It's so interesting as I hear you speaking. It's a lot like entrepreneurship. Like, it is an individual sport. And honestly, the better you get at it, the lonelier it is, because there's fewer people that are going to relate to you if you have a 7-figure business, especially as a woman. I mean, that's like, you're a fraction of the percentage of women-owned businesses. And so it gets even lonelier, it gets even harder as you continue to grow. And what I heard you say, Keith, I think is so important, is that North Star, right? Is like, what is it that you're achieving? What is it that you're working towards? Because if you don't have that vision, or like you sort of lose that vision, or that vision starts getting foggy, it's really easy to be like, it's not that important. Oh, I'm just not going to worry about that, or I'm not going to work through this team issue, or I'm not going to work through this challenge. I'm not going to do that anymore, because you actually forgot what it is that you're working towards, right?
Yeah, and I think what makes this kind of fun, especially from our vantage point when it comes to the tennis world, is you have three of us in completely different states of our tennis life, or coming from different backgrounds. Fred being one of the premier amateurs probably to play in the country. You can make that argument. I'll make it all day long. Cole teaching a tour player, and me coming from like the amateur ranks of tennis. There's different levels to failure, and there's different goals that have to be achieved. Just like when you're working with businesses or you're helping people out with that, there are different businesses. Each business may have a different goal. You may have a business that's looking to break $1 million for a month and hire its 100th employee, or you may have one that's starting up in their basement. Like, there's different levels to failure. And just like for both of those parallels, it's how you manage it and what you're looking to strive towards.
So good. And knowing that, right? I think a lot of people get distracted by the social media feed on what other people are doing, instead of really doing that inside work of like, what is my North Star? Like, what is my vision? And especially in our industry, it's very distracting. You see somebody getting some award on stage because they made some type of monetary, accomplishment, but maybe you don't know what it took to get there. Maybe you don't want that for your life, and I think those are things that we all get to decide.
I mean, this is such a trivial aspect when you brought up the social media. We all took videos of like ourselves playing recently, and there's a great photo of Cole taking my buddy. He looks like a male model, and Fred's like banging the heck out of the ball. And then Wassel, who you and I know both, Laura, it's like I'm just sitting there just going, oh boy, I gotta lose 20 pounds. This video doesn't look great. But it's the truth though, because you start comparing and you start looking at it, and there's so many different levels to attack and succeed and fail. You have both of those sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Even with the podcasts that we're trying to make bigger, and I'm sort of doing the Instagram, and I compare. I get discouraged when I see that our numbers aren't growing as fast as I'd like them to be in terms of followers. But it's really about that, like the North Star. I like that parallel. But you've got to keep the course. Know that what you're planning on and wanting is the right thing, and stick with it.
Yeah, and pay attention to opportunities when they come up, right? So it's
Right.
really interesting because Keith called me to get my advice. It's like, how do I grow a podcast? And I was like, why don't you just be on mine? And here we are. So that worked out. I was like, that's one way, is you guest on people's podcasts and you talk about your podcast, and then people follow you over to your podcast. That's an organic strategy. I want to move to the next question. Sometimes it feels like, and I don't know if you felt this way in tennis. I have in tennis, probably nowhere near the degree to which you have. And I've certainly felt this way in business, where it's like, you're untouchable. You're at the top of the game. You look at your bank account and you're like, well, it's even better than I thought. Or, like things are just going really well. And other times I feel like, have I ever even held a tennis racket before? Like, I don't even know what just happened today. What do you think sort of creates this? How do you break through these plateaus that you get into? Like, maybe you get to a certain place and you're like, I'm just going to hang here at this level. Or like, what does it take to get momentum from the peaks and the valleys to sort of that next level of growth?
Yeah, I think the word I was going to use was momentum. Like, like tennis, there's so much momentum one way or the other. And I mean, from experience in my own game, but then also talking to other people who have been at the top of the game, the best players, when you're sort of in that flow state, you're not thinking about anything. And people ask you, like you're asking us, how do you do this? It's almost like there's no answer, because you're not really thinking about much, because you're in such a zone. But then if you maybe fall off a bit or have a bad week or two, then all of a sudden your mind starts thinking, and then that's when it almost keeps you down. And it's being able to steer those thoughts in the right direction to then find your way back to that flow state. Because I think the more thoughts that are in your head, especially just in a sport like tennis, where you are by yourself out there and there's 6 voices in your head, and you don't have a coach at the bench with you in between every changeover to point you in the right direction. Like in most other sports, you can get coaching almost any minute of the game. And in tennis, you don't have that. And so being able to find whatever works best for you in terms of being in that flow state and having as little to no thoughts as possible. It kind of tends to lead to more momentum in the right direction.
So good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it like, Fred talked about that. It's trying to get thoughts out of your head, and he made the 6 voices. I think he was talking about me in his head, because I used to make the joke all the time: roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a schizophrenic, and so am I. And and it's the truth. And I was very fortunate when I started learning how to play, and when I started learning how to coach. I went down to the Sanchez Casell Academy with Emiliano Sanchez, who's won a couple of Grand Slams. His sister won multiple. They have like 18 Grand Slams amongst the siblings. It's unbelievable. And he heard me playing. And if you ever hear me play when I'm having a bad day, it's you don't want to hear some of the things I say to myself. I can't repeat it on this podcast. It's awful. And he gave me the best tip of advice, because I couldn't get the voices out of my head. I couldn't stop myself from yelling at myself. And he said, Keith, whatever you are doing when you are yelling at yourself, or when you're storming around, taking extra steps, it's wasted energy. He goes, every single thought right now, all of your energy needs to go to what is your strategy in this match. And I was playing a guy who's better than I was. And he goes, what's your strategy? And I go, well, he can't hit over a backhand right now. He just wants to chip and try to get around. And he just goes, that's your strategy. And after every single point, I went, okay, that's my strategy. That's my strategy. No matter what I did, is if I was trying to accomplish it, it helped out. And luckily I beat a guy in like a 4-hour long single match on clay, which was the longest I've ever been on a court. And it was great, because it was a huge thing. And I use that now when I play with people or when I teach. And I think it kind of parallels to what Fred says, is that you're trying to get the voices out, but really your voices are going to, if you're doing it right, into everything is going in a direction. And if you're directing your energy to your goal, it's going to help you out on the court and everywhere else.
Oh my gosh, so good. What do you think, Paul? What do you? I want to hear what you think about flow state. Like, how do you get into that flow state, or when people fall out of it? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Oh, sometimes it's just, I mean, Fred, I want to hear yours, and so Cole, I want to hear yours. But sometimes it's just one little moment. You just kind of hit one ball, and you go, yep. Like, and you're just like, that's what I'm doing. And that's what I've done my entire life. And that's what I've trained for. Whether you've played for a minute, like whether it's your first lesson and you hit one, or whether you've been playing for 15 years and like, I keep hyping up Fred here. Like, Fred hit with Monica Puig before she won Olympic gold. Like whether you've played at that level or at Cole and I's level, I think it's just one little moment that can kind of get you back into it, and then using it to stay positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Freddie.
I think, I don't know, I haven't been competing or playing much since college, and this past week I've kind of really ramped it back up. And it was like 2 days ago, I think I even texted these guys. I kind of found it again a little bit, and I think it's like I just had one thought in my head, and it was, I mean, to get pretty tennis specific, all I was thinking about was where I was contacting the ball. That was the only thing I was thinking about, and that was the only thing in my head. Everything else, just I was moving seamlessly. I wasn't thinking about where to hit the ball or really how to hit it or anything like that. But I was like, all right, as long as I'm contacting it here, I'm golden. And it almost just feels like I've got music going on in my head or something. Like there's like nothing. It's just such empty space, and there's basically one positive process-oriented thought, and then that's all that's in there.
Fred, is that the 7th voice in your head, the music, or would that be one of the 6 that's going on up there?
Yeah, it depends. It's usually the Jackson 5.
Yeah, but it would have to be on vinyl.
Well done.
It'd have to be on vinyl for Freddie.
Well played. Well played. Cool.
Yeah.
So much mindset. I'm curious what you have to say.
Sure. For if I know I'm gonna. Okay, so if I'm on court, right, I can kind of feel that I'm gonna have a good day based on how the day has went already.
Oh, interesting.
So if I wake up and I'm like lethargic and it's dark and stormy outside, it sounds cold, I don't really want to go play this match. But if I get there and I've had the greatest day, I'm running to balls a little bit faster. And for me, I don't know, these two may agree. Footwork has kind of been a pain in the butt for me. Timing shots and getting there and, getting back to the middle of the court, getting to the next corner. I probably don't take the quickest and best route to the next ball. So if you're having a bad day, you're not necessarily going to be invested in, running and getting after everything. But that also goes in tune with playing more. So I'm playing in this men's league now, and I never really have played tournament play or in sort of a league like this. So you get more comfortable behind the ball as well. So naturally, just practice and making more balls. But really, for me, it's the energy. It's the energy and the footwork and making sure that you're up for it that day, or else you got to fight your demons.
Yes, that's so good.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on two things that Cole said. One, I was laughing because we do a segment on the show called Rapovalov. Dennis Shapovalov does like he did like a rap segment, and it was the worst. Like he did like a rap on stage and he's released stuff, and it's the worst thing of all time. So we picked songs that kind of like fit the theme of the week for tennis. And he said he had a bad day. And one of his songs was "You Had a Bad Day" by Daniel Powder. So I was just laughing real hard at that. That was a couple weeks ago. But he said something that I remember trying to teach when I ran high performance juniors. He touched on putting yourself out there in this men's league. And I don't care what level you're playing at, you put yourself out there, you're putting yourself out there.
It's hard. Yeah.
It's incredibly challenging because it's not, tennis is not only an expression of your athleticism, it's an expression of what your personality is. It comes out in your game. Like, will you be a grinder that goes back and forth? Will you be a big power hitter that wants to come in? It's an expression of a little bit of who you are personality wise. And a big thing we used to do all the time was drills that put that pressure on the kids so they could feel it when they were training. So they got more comfortable in that scenario. And that's such a big aspect. Like I remember we did a game one time, we had 20 kids and we did one serve. You had one serve. If you missed it, you were out. And then it just kept going, winning and losing until there was the final two people. And it's just like, you would never see these kids that were incredibly good, just like fail under the pressure. And I think that just once you put yourself in scenarios where you can fail, that really helps because then allows you to then succeed going forward. You've been in that moment.
Oh, this is such great advice. And I think particularly when you're playing singles, which is, again, a lot like entrepreneurship. And let me tell you, for anybody who's listening that wants to be popular, play 40 plus singles. You'll become real popular really fast.
Especially on the women's side. They can't. Kate's playing all singles for her 18 and over team. And she's like, please make it stop.
Just keep reminding me of how much younger you are of me. That's fine. We can do that on my podcast. I don't mind at all. But a couple things that I see, in business. The first is that flow state. And I think it's what people struggle with is that it doesn't come as fast as they want it to, right? So for example, I do a lot of business consulting. At this point, I could probably look at 10 pages of data and in 10 minutes be like, this is the thing you need to do. But that came from years of repetition, right? And sometimes I train and certify consultants in some of my programming, and they want that to happen so fast, and that flow state of like, yeah, no problem, not even thinking about it. Like that's the clear and obvious first step. Like that just comes from that repetition, right? And the other thing that I think it comes from is allowing that one simple focus. So, Cole, you talked about footwork, right? Freddie, you talked about contact point. Like just having that one thing that you tell yourself, right? That's what today is about. I think it overcomes whether or not it's dark outside or sunny outside. It depends on, I think those types of just simple mantras that we have for ourselves and the thoughts we get to choose about the work ends up having so much of an impact on the outcome. And I find that a lot of people who are working through, I think the learning stages of entrepreneurship really haven't quite gotten that down yet. Like they don't realize how much they have agency over the outcome based on how they think about the work. And that's most of it. A lot of people come to me and they want tactics, but what I really want to tell them is it's usually not, it's usually how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, just to kind of pull off that for a little bit was that I played a lot of times with people where they heard I was a teaching pro when I was at the time, or they heard I was a former one, and they'd go into the match and they come over to me for a doubles match. They'd be like, what's our strategy for this match? What's our strategy? Like, Keith, you got to have something concocted up. It's going to be brilliant. And I'd be like, make as many first serves as you can, just make returns. And then the first live ball, we're going to hit down the middle of the court. And they'd be like, that's it. I'd be like, if you do that, I guarantee we're going to win this thing. And playing a match with some guy, and we like, we're cruising, and he's walking back just going, this is effing genius. This is brilliant. This is the smartest thing. And I didn't tell him anything that was outside the norm, but for years and years and years, he was doing something different. And like, and he got in the middle of the match, he got out of the middle of our strategy. And I went, Randy, what's the strategy? And he goes, oh, first serves in, returns in, and first ball down the middle. And then we like cruise through the rest of the match. And it was just like, sometimes it's something simple. Like you said, it's finding something simple when you're consulting, but they don't see it. And because they've been doing something so many other ways their entire life.
Yeah. It's like over the net and in the green part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's the strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my favorite thing of all time. Like, Kate plays a 3-0 league and I got yelled at for coaching, which I don't coach. And and I'm like, what do you think I'm telling her, to hit in the blue more often than the other person does? Like, that's like what are we talking about?
I'm going to go to our last question before we wrap up this piece of mindset. And I won't follow all of the Grand Slams. I'm sure you do too, and talk about them. And Iga
Swiatek.
Thank you. You always hear it and you're like, that sounds really good. And then you try to repeat it and it does not sound very good. Posted on social media saying, after she was ranked number 1 in the world, went to the Australian Open, lost well before the finals, and said, posted a great post, but then the last sentence was, it never gets easier. You just get better. I read that and I was like, oh, so good. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but just to summarize your thoughts, how do you maintain that winning mindset when you feel like you're just not winning? You're just kind of losing, or you're on a losing streak?
Sure. So this question made me think of an interview I did with Louis Vosloo. He was an ATP coach since retired, but he coached Kevin Anderson. Kevin Anderson made 2 Grand Slam finals and made number 5 in the world. So he's a South African. He's a great tennis player. And when I talked to Louis about his coaching career, when he was coaching Kevin, he talked about how Kevin had to qualify for almost 12 tournaments in a row. And I said, like, you're flying these places early, and and you got to win matches that you're not necessarily winning points off of early in those rounds. And I said, why? And he goes, he just had to believe he was good enough. Mm-hmm. So Kevin played at Illinois. He was one of the better tennis players at Illinois. Obviously went to the tour. So he knew, you have those past experience of being the greatest at that level before you go tour. And then he just had something else in terms of his ability. His level was better than most, having made number 5. But it's just maintaining that belief, I think. And then obviously surrounding yourself with good people. He found a good coach in Louis. And the 2 of them said, hey, you may lose this week, but we're qualifying again next week. This is the situation, being real with yourself that this is the situation we're in, and this is the way forward. And he ended up qualifying 12 weeks in a row into 12 different tournaments. And then on the end of that, I said, what was the most rewarding part of your time with him? And he said, there's a tournament in Monte Carlo. It's called the Rolex Masters. And I said, what's the most rewarding moment that you and Kevin had? He said, we're sitting on this balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. And Louis turned to Kevin and said, do you ever think you'd be here? Mm-hmm. And Kevin said, honestly, no, never thought I was going to be here, but all that hard work, it pays off. And, that's sort of a great story. Not necessarily, everybody experiences. I mean, you have an immense talent. But really, it's just believing in yourself that you belong there. That's going to keep pushing you forward.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is gratitude for the milestones. Like, I think sometimes we get to a certain place and we're like, especially as entrepreneurs, we're on to the next thing, instead of looking out and being like, wow, I actually never thought I'd even get here. Like, this is awesome. And just giving yourself credit for that.
I'm sure that number 5 and making 2 Grand Slam finals was not his goal when he started playing tennis.
Yeah. right?
So,
Like,
yeah.
instead of being like, why am I not number one? Being like, wow, this is like just allowing yourself to have that moment. I think a lot of people probably in sports and in business they just don't allow that, right? They don't allow it to be awesome in itself.
Right.
When I hear that quote that Iga said about how it doesn't get easier, it makes me think of, there was another quote I heard from Kara Lawson, who's the Duke women's basketball coach, and it was circulating around Twitter a lot in the last couple months, but she said, yeah, things don't get easier. We just handle hard better. And I think that's something that really sticks, and I use a lot with my team here. Is like, just because you put in hard work doesn't mean that then things will become easier. It's like we are building up that tolerance so that we can handle hard better, perform better in difficult situations. Those situations aren't going to get easier just because we had a great 2 weeks of practice. It's like, those 2 weeks of practice are preparing us for that difficult situation so we can handle it better than we would have 2 weeks ago.
So good.
Yeah, I mean, there's the old cliche that pressure makes diamonds, which pressure also makes rubble too. That's one thing I used to tell a lot of my students too. And if it never gets hard, it gets easier when you put yourself out there, but the pressure in those situations and what they deal with, it gets easier. And what Fred was talking about, if you're willing to accept it, if you're willing to understand that it's coming and you're wanting to face it head on. We're going to throw another quote out there, I guess, which was, this made me think of Stan Wawrinka, the tattoo he has on his arm, which is from, I had to look it up. It's ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail again. And he got that tattooed on, I think, right after he lost a quarterfinal against Djokovic in 2013 or 2014. It was like an epic. And then he beat him the next year and won his first Grand Slam and won a couple after that. And it's, if you're willing to put yourself out there, as I'm glowing, if you're willing to put yourself out there, it's, it does get easier because you're willing to accept that's going to happen. And that's what happened with that interview that Cole was talking about with Louis about Kevin Anderson, is that he was willing to put himself out there to fail. And that's just where it just gets easier to do it time and time again. And you kind of forget the failures over a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're
Iga's got the formula. She cannot stop winning right now. It's
and she invested heavily in a mindset coach. And I was doing some research on it. I'm sure you all have probably done even more than I have, but I was just curious, where did she come from? How did she win so much so frequently? And what she started doing is learning to let go of the outcome. It's such a paradox, right? It's like you want to win, but then you let go of winning, and then all of a sudden you're winning. And she did a lot of work on and as a woman, I really relate to this, like not feeling like you're letting your family down, or not letting, like for me, if I don't win in business, I'm like, oh man, like that's a big impact on my family, my kids, and it's hard to let go of that sense of responsibility that we have when people have really invested in us and believe in us, or showed up for us, or given us money or resources or whatever. It's hard to forgive ourselves, I think, if we don't perform to the level of expectation that maybe we have or they have. But what she did is, it sounded like she really started doing some work on, like, my family loves me anyways, regardless of whether I win or lose, and doing a lot of that inner work that, funny enough, turns into a winning. But you have to detach from it in order to get that result. Any other thoughts on mindset? I'm going to wrap up this segment and then we'll move over to part 2. But any other final thoughts or ideas that you want to share?
I'm starting to feel like we should be hired as mindset coaches a little bit based on some of this a little bit. But no, I mean,
to pay for, friends.
Yes, I do. And God bless Kate. But I mean, the biggest thing on mindset, I think we kind of always talk about that Fred and myself and Cole always talk about when it comes to tennis, is that if you're on the island, be accepting of the island, know that you also have support around you. And if you're going for your goal, like, you're going to fail. Like, that was a big thing that we always talk about, is that you're going to fail. And whether or not you are, like I said, a beginner tennis player to the top amateur in the world or the top professional, you're going to fail in your own ways and you're going to succeed in your own ways. It's just being accepting and being happy to be along that journey. is kind of the fun part. That's what makes tennis so much different than a lot of other sports in that regard.
So good. So this is wrapping up part one of this incredible podcast interview series. I hope that you got as much out of this as I said you would. If you're now thinking maybe you should take up tennis, you're probably right. And you're probably going to want to look that up in your local area. And if you're also just enjoying this conversation because it's such an interesting one that probably not very many people are having, make sure to tune into part two. And in the meantime, search up in Apple Podcasts, No Man's Land Tennis. Make sure that you look at their podcast, you subscribe, you let other tennis fans that are in your life know about it. And we'll see you in part two in just a little bit.